Hi everyone, and welcome to Med with Maram Shorts. And today we're going to be talking about labor, but specifically in it, the maternal and fetal anatomy, because it's a very tricky place and it's a very important part. The most important thing to know when it comes to maternal pelvis part is that it has a pelvic inlet, a mid cavity, and an outlet. Tamam? So the pelvic inlet is the beginning of the pelvis, and then there's the mid pelvis and the outlet. And what's important about it is to know the diameters of each. So each one has a transverse diameter and an AP diameter, or anterior posterior diameter. So if we were to draw it, it would always look like a circle or an oval, but it depends on it. The pelvic inlet has a larger transverse diameter than an anterior posterior diameter. So it's more longer transversely than anterior posteriorly. So it looks like an oval on this, like this. Tamam? So the transverse is 13.5 centimeters, while the anterior posterior is 11 centimeters. And this matters because when it comes to labor, you'll know that the beginning of the labor, the fetal head has to be, the longest part of the fetal head has to be corresponding to the longest part of the maternal pelvis so that it can go through it smoothly. So in the inlet, you'll find that it would be transversely, okay? So next is the mid cavity, and in the mid cavity, it's equal in size. So the transverse and the AP diameter are equal. It looks more like a circle, if that makes sense. So we have 12 centimeters in the transverse diameter and 12 centimeters in the AP diameter. When it comes to the outlet, it's again the opposite of the inlet. So the outlet is the opposite of the inlet. You've got a transverse diameter of 11 centimeters and an AP diameter of 13.5 centimeters. So now it still looks like an oval, but this time the oval looks like that instead. So that means that throughout labor, the baby has to rotate, because in the beginning it has to have a transverse diameter that's more, but in the outlet it needs to have a longer AP diameter, okay? So next we'll be going on to the fetal diameters. And the fetal diameters, to be able to understand it properly, you need to just have a small idea of the fetal skull. The fetal skull is formed of bones, sutures, and fontanelles. The bones are the parietal bones, the temporal bones, the frontal bones, and the occipital bone. And the sutures are basically connecting the bones. So we've got the frontal suture here, we've got the coronal suture here, the sagittal suture, and the lambdoid suture. And where the sutures meet is where we have two fontanelles, the anterior fontanelle that's larger and the posterior fontanelle. The important thing to know is that they are very soft and unossified, so they can easily move with each other, okay? And that is important because we have something called molding, which is basically the reduction of the fetal diameter to allow progression through the pelvis. So the sutures or the bones would literally go on above each other so that they will allow the fetal head to be smaller so that it can go through with labor. Fetal molding has a specific level to it, and if there is severe molding or the molding happens way too early, that can be an indication for obstructed labor. And when the molding occurs, there will be like a small part of the fetal head which would swell above it, or like a swelling beneath the skin, and that is called the caput. So it's very important to remember that this is also a normal feature. It is normal to be in the center. If it's not in the center, then it's also abnormal. So how do we assess molding? We assess it vaginally, so it would be by PV examination. And if there's no molding, you'll feel the suture lines separate. If there's molding, you'll feel that there is suture lines that are meeting. So if you were to move your hand on the suture, you'll feel that the lines are touching each other. 2+ molding is when the bones are overlapped, but if you put gentle pressure on it, or if you pressure it, it will go back. And 3+ molding is when the bones are overlapped and are irreducible, and 3+ molding is not a good thing, okay? So then we've got the fetal skull parameters. The fetal skull parameters depend on the attitude of the fetal head. What is the attitude? It's basically the flexion or extension, degree of flexion or extension of the fetal head. So the fetus should normally, in a vertex presentation, be fully flexed, and that would make it within the smallest diameter, which is good enough to get out of the pelvis perfectly. It can be extended slightly, or like there's poor flexion, or it can be fully extended, like in the face presentation. So in each of these types of presentations, we would have a different diameter. Start with the suboccipital-bregmatic, which is 9.5 centimeters. It is when the baby is fully flexed, so you would start below the occiput all the way to the bregma, which is so below the occiput all the way to the bregma, right? So which is basically the anterior fontanelle. And that diameter is 9.5 centimeters. It's a good diameter. It's smaller than the pelvis, and it can squeeze in really well. So that is the full flexed vertex presentation, which is a good presentation. We've got a suboccipital frontal, which is during the partially deflexed vertex, and that is this one. So it's not all the way up to the bregma, it's more to the frontal bone. And this is 10.5 centimeters, but it's still less than the diameter of the pelvis, so it can still go out, but it's a bit more difficult. We've got the occipital frontal, which is a deflexed vertex, and that is from the occiput, but to all the way to the frontal bone. And that is a really long diameter, as you can see, it's 11.5 centimeters. Again, this is a bit more difficult, but it's still okay. The next one is the mentovertical. The mentovertical is during brow presentation, so it's from the mento, so it's from the chin all the way to the vertex, and it's a very long diameter, as you can see. This is 13 centimeters in brow presentation, and that is basically almost equal to the pelvic diameter, remember? So it's almost impossible for mentovertical to be delivered, or it's very difficult. The next is submental-bregmatic, and the submental-bregmatic is in the face presentation, and it's 9.5 centimeters. So it's similar to the suboccipital-bregmatic, but it's not the perfect presentation, but it's still small enough. Make sure you memorize all of these diameters, and most importantly, know that the suboccipital-bregmatic is 9.5, which is the one that we're aiming for, and the one that we don't like is the mentovertical or the brow presentation, which is 13 centimeters, which is too wide. Thank you.